You okay, Mulder?
Yeah.
Whatever you're feeling, you did the right thing.
It's just that I believe in him.
Sometimes when you want to believe so badly, you end up looking too hard.
Hello, and welcome to Discovering the X-Files, the podcast in which a newbie takes a deep dive into the entirety of Chris Carter's universe, while longtime fans escort me on the journey. A perilous journey filled with government conspiracies or weird monsters every other week. I'm Erix Antoine, and today, Daniel and I will be discussing a two-part story which unfolds across the episodes Dwayne Barry and Ascension. The episodes aired consecutively on October 14th and 21st, 1994. Dwayne Barry was written and directed by Chris Carter. Ascension was written by Paul Brown and directed by Michael Lang. This story is about Dwayne Barry, a former FBI agent who is seemingly haunted by his alien abduction experiences and has been in and out of institutions for much of his adult life. First, he takes hostages at a travel agency in an attempt to return to the place of his first abduction and make a trade. His attempts to do this are thwarted by Mulder and the FBI. But Barry subsequently escapes and kidnaps Scully. He goes with her to the abduction site where she is taken. Meanwhile, more facets to the conspiracy are uncovered as Mulder comes to realize Krycek's true intentions, and Skinner finally decides to reopen the X-Files. It's a big story with a lot of important developments and appearances by several recurring actors. Nicholas Lee as Krycek, William B. Davis as the Smoking Man, Midge Pileggi as Skinner, Stephen Williams as X, and Sheila Larkin as Margaret Scully. At the center of it all is Steve Railsback giving a galvanizing performance as Dwayne Barry. After the break, Daniel and I are going to get into it. Stick around.
It says here that you've been refusing to take your medicine.
I don't like the way it makes me feel.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about that. Because we give you that medicine for a reason, Dwayne. Because of your behavior. You still hearing voices?
I'm not crazy, Doc. Dwayne Barry's not like these other guys. They're coming again. They're coming again. I can feel it. They're gonna take Dwayne Barry to his place.
Nobody's coming, Dwayne.
Nobody can stop him.
So yeah, we were talking about how, like, what the writers would do, what the showrunners would do to handle Gillian Anderson's pregnancy. And so, one must commend them for coming up with something this elaborate and creative to deal with the issue. Because looking into behind the scenes, apparently it turns out that she had actually been pregnant. She'd gotten pregnant during the production of season 1.
Okay.
I think towards the end, and it's interesting because, how we were talking about the whole thing about how did they come up with the idea of, well, let's shutter the X-Files at the end of the season, and then was all of this part of that? And it seems like it was. And when you think about it, it's interesting because, it was just the first season of the show. And apparently when she announced that she was pregnant, at first they were apparently, let's just say they weren't pleased by this news. And so they could have very easily just written her out of the show. Think about it. They could have very easily said, well, you know what, fuck it, it's the first season. Let's kill her off. Let's kill off the character. come up with a new partner for Mulder, whatever. And they very easily could have done that. And I think it's, I mean, I'm not saying that they should have done that, obviously.
Right.
I'm very glad that they didn't, but my point is that it's interesting that they could have and chose not to. I guess that's testament to just how much faith they had in Gillian Anderson as, one of the series leads. And I think it's what you've always said, that one of the key elements to why this works is because of their chemistry, is because it's the two of them and it's those two actors working together. And I think the showrunners recognized that. Yeah. I think they realized, okay, if we risk hobbling the show if we do that. We risk, let's figure out what to do, because I mean, pregnancy is not forever. We'll figure out a way to work around this. And they certainly did. And this is clearly this was designed to be very specifically that, because I think originally it was intended as just a one-shot mythology episode. But then they said, well, we have a chance to kind of do a little more with this, and that way deal with getting Gillian out of production for a few weeks or however long she needs while she goes and has her baby. And that way we tell a nice extended story, because it feels that way when you watch the first part. It's a two-part episode that is divided into two very distinct halves.
Yeah.
It's not like it has like a cliffhanger at the end of the first part involving Scully's abduction, but it is pretty much, it is two stories that they sort of figured out how to splice together.
You can see now why I was beating around the bush when we were talking about where things were going.
Yeah. No, of course. I mean, it would have been a major spoiler, and clearly that this is what they did. And the thing is, they did it in a way that feels kind of, I mean, it's a good story. It's just a good, like, exciting thriller that they threw in there.
Yeah.
The whole thing, the whole arc is very interesting. But we can go kind of by parts. First, let's talk about the Dwayne Barry part of it, which is, I mean, ultimately it's the whole thing, because the whole storyline revolves around the character. But it stems from a very tight kind of hostage negotiation thriller. Almost a bottle episode, which
almost, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could basically, that's what it is, and it's a tight hostage negotiation thriller, like Dog Day Afternoon or Mad City or Cadillac Man or like whatever. It's that given an X-Files spin, and it's Chris Carter's debut as director in the series, which I thought was interesting. He didn't only write the episode, he directed it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that he waited this long, really.
Yeah.
You would have thought he would have done one in the first season, although given how strong the show's identity is from the get-go, he may have just been up to his knees in producer duties and just making sure that everything flowed right without having to worry about actually shooting an episode himself on top of all that.
Right, and he'd had no experience directing, I think, anything, if I'm not mistaken. I think he was just a writer up until this point. He'd worked on some other, I think he'd worked on like some Disney stuff before doing X-Files.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then eventually, he did this, and he finally figured, okay, it's time to cut my teeth on something, and apparently he really relied on David Nutter, who's also one of the producers at that point of the show, to sort of guide him, to sort of serve as his mentor for this directing assignment. And he does a pretty good job of it, and he gave himself, it's a very character-driven, very actor-focused episode.
Yeah.
Where he didn't have to worry too much about anything too elaborate in terms of, it has its things. It has a bunch of little, bells and whistles in there, but it is essentially a character-driven bottle episode. So it's about blocking, where all the actors are going to be, and, that sort of thing.
If you're going to cut your teeth as a director on an episode of your own show, this is the kind of one, this is the type of episode that you want to do it on. Where you really, for the most part, only have to focus on the performances. And, once again, they have locked down 2 great character actors for that first episode.
Yes.
You
Oh,
got
yes.
Steve Railsback and CCH Pounder. So
Yeah.
you just turn on the camera and you're fine. I mean, you
Yeah,
don't really have
right.
to worry about anything else.
You trust your actors to do the work, and they're going to deliver. And I know he does some interesting stuff too. Like there is this one bit where you juxtapose. It's a little bit on the nose, but it works. Dwayne Barry is talking about his abduction, and he's detailing how there was one point where they drilled into his teeth with a laser. He doesn't actually say that, but what we see on screen is that it was with a laser. And that's juxtaposed with the FBI trying to drill into the wall,
Yeah.
to put in the hidden camera. So I think that's that's kind of clever and well done. You brought up Steve Railsback, and that's let's talk about him for a second. Whatever happened to Steve Railsback? I mean, he's a great actor, which you see here. So clearly.
You know what? I've been wondering of that of late myself, and I think it stemmed mostly from a semi-recent rewatch of Life Force, which is, of course, him dealing with aliens once again, albeit in a very different manner. But
yes.
Yeah, he was. I don't think that man has an intensity level below 11 for anything he does, and he was all over the place in the 70s and 80s. And I guess into the early 90s, and then just kind of fell off the radar there after that. I know he'll pop up in stuff occasionally, but I'm sure he's working. It's just not in anything that I've been seeing.
Yeah, well, at least certainly not. Yeah, he probably shows up on TV every now and then. But the thing about it is, because I mean, he was in some major movies. He was in like The Stuntman, which is an incredible movie where he's amazing in that movie, and that's like a high profile movie, which you would think would launch an actor's career and sort of, it's a star making thing. And he played Charles Manson, right?
Yes.
In the TV movie of Helter Skelter. And so these are like high profile things. And then all of a sudden he drops off the map, and then you see him turn up in something like this, and you realize this guy's, as you said, the intensity dialed up to 11. This guy is an intense. Maybe he's almost too intense. Maybe it's almost like it's.
That could be the problem.
So we've got this really cool role for you where you play just kind of a family man, just a real estate salesman or something, and you have a family, and it's kind of a dramatic sort of piece. You could.
If a salesman was walking up to your door and it was Steve Railsback, you'd probably lock your door and turn your lights off and pretend you weren't home.
Yeah, especially if, like in this show, he keeps referring to himself in the third person.
Yes.
Which is it's sort of thing like, I'm not crazy, and then immediately after saying that, he starts to refer to himself in the third person. So you go like, okay, well, that's an unusual thing, and I don't even know. I mean, I wonder if that was an actor thing or if that was in the script. But in any case, it's certainly an interesting detail.
Oh yeah.
And he's genuinely unsettling and frightening in both parts of the story. In the one the episode that's focused on him, and in the Ascension episode as well. He is incredibly intense. And the thing about Steve Railsback, he strikes me as one of those actors that's weird. Look back on some actors from the late 70s and 80s who were like who were in some major films and then sort of faded away in a weird way. And so you have Steve Railsback. He's kind of like Michael Paré in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where you wonder how is it that guy didn't turn out to be a big star. Now, to be fair, I do think Steve Railsback is a better actor.
I agree.
Well, Mike Paré is, he's got good presence. He's a good-looking guy or whatever, but his range is very limited, and so you go, well, that's about all he can do. On the other end, you've got Railsback, who clearly has a lot of range, but is just like really a big actor, and so it's about kind of figuring out where to put him in, and it was interesting, and I think that like Chris Carter had resisted the idea of casting actors like that. At least I looked into the behind the scenes, that he was trying to avoid what he referred to as marquee names, which let's be honest. I don't know that this counts. You know, I mean, it's not like he's casting Jack Nicholson. You know what I mean? Let's come on. You know, so far there haven't been any marquee names in the X-Files first two seasons so far. But I don't know that there ever will be. Maybe at some point there might be. But I don't. I mean, marquee names by whose estimation?
That's a funny thing to hear because, outside of, like you mentioned the stuntman earlier, outside of a burst of, I guess, leading man roles in the late 70s, I've always viewed him as a character actor, no different than, people they've already had, like William Sanderson or Jeff Kober or Xander Berkeley. Like, I wouldn't call any of these people marquee names. They're all very much of a piece. Mitch Pileggi's another one. Stephen Williams.
Yeah,
I mean,
Tony Todd.
I mean, he's plowing through the perfect type of field for this kind of show already. So it's funny to me that he would almost consider, him to be a bit more of a marquee above the rest when, as far as I'm concerned, he sits right alongside them all and they're all great. But yes. I wouldn't really ever think of Steve Railsback as like A-list star power for a TV show guest spot.
Yeah, no, I don't even think I would even say that even in '94. I mean, I doubt that it was like Steve Railsback guest stars on tonight's episode of the X-Files. Like, I really doubt they even made a big deal out of it. Maybe they did. I don't know. But no, he's fantastic in both of the episodes. And yeah, I mean, it reminded me that he's still around, and it would be nice to see him turn up in something, I would not be surprised if as I told you, I'm also like going through CSI just for shits and giggles. So I will not be surprised if at some point he shows up on that show as like a cop or something. Yeah, because a couple of days ago I saw an episode with like Greg Henry playing kind of like playing an asshole.
Another
like
one. Yeah.
Yeah. Greg Henry's. I mean, he will probably. Does he show up on the X-Files? You can go ahead and tell me if he does. He probably does.
Not that I can remember, but I'll be shocked if we don't come across him at some point anyway, because I mean, he's exactly the type of actor that they would get.
Right. I mean, he is one of those guys. Oh, Greg Henry. Well, of course, you're but so like I saw like Greg Henry, and so like so I'm thinking, yeah, a few episodes from now, Steve Railsback showing up as like some murderer or something or other would be interesting. So we have the first part of the story is this negotiation thriller. I did like in Mulder's introduction, he is swimming, and he's having a swim. And he has these very delightful trunks. This very delightful pair of swim trunks on.
God.
Which I'm sure this was the talk of the town for all the ladies in the audience who were big fans of the show back in the day. I would imagine.
He is just straight up peacocking when he's walking down the side of the pool alongside Krycek with the Speedo and nothing else on.
Yes. Oh yes, that was
hysterical.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, that's I mean, he pulls off the look.
Right.
It works for him. But that was funny. If slightly, that was interesting. If distracting, and then we're into the episode, and it was it's a very tight, very good story, and the way that the whole thing develops is very interesting. That they are delving into the mythology, they're delving into the conspiracy. I think it's also something that I find intriguing is how they haven't bothered with Krycek. Like, they haven't bothered trying to like string that along at all. like we know from the very first episode that he appears. By the end of that, we already know he's bad news, and so like they're not even kidding. And by the end of this story, he's already an enemy. How I said before that I like how they didn't resolve the X-Files shutting down right away. Mm-hmm. They didn't, they sort of let that sort of simmer for a while. We now know that was in part by design, because they were just trying to figure out, how to properly keep Mulder and Scully apart, work around the pregnancy, all of that. So now we realize that it's probably that it's all by design that they even shut down the X-Files in the first place. And so here we are by the end of episode 7 of the second season. Okay, that the big thing that Skinner says. He's like, "Yep, I'm going to be opening the X-Files again." So, okay, that's the end of that storyline. Like, okay, now the X-Files are back as of next episode, I suppose. But just as much as they strung along they kind of let that simmer for a while. They didn't solve it right away. The Krycek thing feels to me more like something that in a modern series would have been the whole season.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, like it would have been just the whole season of Krycek, and they wouldn't have even revealed that he was, at least halfway through the season, if not more, that they would have actually had the big reveal. That up until then you would have been thinking, oh, he's a good guy. He's helping him out, whatever. And then you have the big either the mid-season break twist that it turns out he's bad, like what they did on Agents of Shield with in the first season of Agents of Shield. Where they took that one character and turned him into a bad guy. I mean, so it sort of has that feel to it, where I can see another show being like, yeah, let's make Krycek sort of his partner, let's make him the hero, and like the second hero until we bring back Scully, and so at that point we need Krycek to sort of get out of the way. So let's give him a heel turn. But no, like they introduce him essentially as a heel right away. So I thought that was interesting. And not only do they introduce him, and so it's like we know, but then by the end of this story arc, Mulder knows too. So
right,
like that's not even Mulder and the rest know. So
that's the big kicker. If this were a modern, especially a network TV show, Krycek would have been introduced in episode 1 or 2 of the season. You wouldn't have found out that he's a bad guy until like episode 8 or 9. And then they would have strung you along for at least another 8 episodes without Mulder knowing about it, to the point where it would strain credibility and just make Fox look stupid. That's how that thing usually plays out in a network show. But yeah, no, they didn't even do that. They toss Krycek in there, they let you know he's bad news, and then 2 episodes later, 2 episodes later, Mulder himself knows it too, over and done with.
And that's good, like what you said. Like anything else would just make Fox it would make Mulder look stupid, and that's exactly it. I mean, you're absolutely right, because think about it in this episode, so Krycek goes in there and he's talking to Dwayne Barry, and then he steps out of there, and a few minutes later Dwayne Barry is dead. So you go, only an idiot would not immediately assume that there might be some kind of connection. I mean, the last person to see him alive is Krycek. And so and Mulder's on top of it immediately. He's asking for the toxicology report. He's there. He's on it. He knows. And he's already suspecting. And then the smoking man's unfortunate habit and I would say rudeness in not even cleaning up after himself is what ultimately clues Mulder into the truth. When he finds the butts inside Krycek's car.
Yeah, between the tram operator disappearing and the cigarette butts, and then Dwayne Barry mysteriously passing away, it's just red flags out the wazoo.
Let's talk about the tram operator. Okay, so here we have in this pair of episodes, we have an exciting sequence involving a cable car, and that is to me unusual. That's not something that we see very often. To have like an action sequence that involves this particular vehicle, and that is both intriguing and frightening, because here in La Paz, we have what has now become a world-famous form of transportation, which is that we have a cable car system, essentially, that takes you to various locations around the city. It's not just this thing that goes up a mountain or whatever, as it is usually in many other places. This is actually a major system which has like, I think like 11, 12. It's more than that. It's a bunch of lines with tons of stations all over the city. So it's like our version of the metro. You know what I mean? That's what it is.
Yeah.
And it's a cable car system, and it is advertised as the safest means of travel. And I believe that, because I worked on the documents. Like I was hired to be a translator for the technical manuals and documents that explained how this system worked and everything. And so I got a little bit of a peek into how it was, and I got an education as to how it works. And so I thought, oh, well, that seems pretty safe. And they have that fail-safe installed, and that one here and that one there. But then when you watch a thing like this, you go, this is, the guy's talking about, no, don't go too fast because it'll jump the cable. It'll jump at the tower, and then like it's speed on a tram, and I thought to myself, I had not thought about that being a possibility. Because like the big fear, like I'll cop to my own ignorance as to how these things worked before I actually read about it and everything and found out how it worked. I used to assume that the cars were like on the cables, like that they were like sliding across, or that they were going, that they had like wheels that went on the cables. Right? That's how I always assumed it was. And then I found out, no. I mean, they're affixed to the cable, and it's the cable that moves. The cable's like on a system.
That makes sense.
And the cable itself moves, not the actual tram. The tram is fixed in place. So it was the kind of thing where I went, and then I said, well, so I guess if anything ever goes wrong, it won't just be me, it'll be everybody. Like the whole cable will break, and every single car will just plummet to the ground, and it'll be an apocalyptic tragedy where hundreds will die, not just me. But in any case, watching an action sequence involving a tram for me was a novel thing, and I liked it. I think it's a very well done sequence. Although one thing that confused me is that, so Krycek is waiting to receive orders from presumably the Smoking Man or someone aligned with the Smoking Man. And he's like, all right, I've stopped him. I'm stalling him. I'm waiting for you to tell me what to do next. And, Mulder runs out of patience, as of course he would, and starts to figure out a more spectacular way of, I guess his plan is to climb out and just climb the rest of the way himself or something. I mean, I guess that's what he's trying to do, like pull a Sylvester Stallone and just sort of like get on the cable and sort of climb to the other end of the mountain. But then while he's on there, then Krycek starts running the thing again, right? And then I go, hang on a second. You realize you could kill him? Are you like, aren't you waiting? Weren't you given explicit orders not to kill him or not? Like I don't, And so I always wondered what was Krycek's plan at that point. Like, was he trying to kill Mulder? Like
I think so. I think because both at the end of Krycek's initial episode, and then again, I think during the first part of this double episode, he basically says, why don't you just let me kill him? Why don't you just let me assassinate him? It'll be over and done with. Your problem's gone. And then, of course, cigarette smoking man's response is, then we risk turning one man's obsession into, an entire crusade.
Right. Yes, exactly. Like, they don't want to make him a martyr. That's right. The thing.
But the fact that he brought that up twice, and then he pulls the stunt with the tram car, it tells me he's sitting there thinking, okay, if I turn this on and he accidentally falls to his death, it's not my fault that he climbed out there. Right. Like, I think he is legitimately trying to kill him, but in a non-shooting him in the back of the head kind of way.
Right, and that's the other thing too. When he cold cocks the tram operator, now the implication is that he killed the tram operator. But that's not something that had occurred to me. I mean, at that moment, you're not thinking about it, but you go, hang on a second. So the tram starts up again. Mulder makes it to the other end of the mountain. Then, he finds Dwayne Barry out in the, up on the mountain, and all of that transpires. And they eventually, take Dwayne Barry into custody and everything. So that's the thing. The whole thing about the tram operator, right, because the tram operator would have said something. The tram operator would confess, would say that he was hit over the head. So clearly they had to eliminate that person. And it comes up very sort of, it just gets mentioned, just dropped in conversation. I think when Mulder is talking to Skinner later on, He just happens to say something about like the murder of you're responsible for the murder of Dwayne Barry and of the tram operator or whatever. All of a sudden they're talking about the tram operator. And my question is, was he not an issue when they were at the hospital?
Mulder references it as the murder of Dwayne Barry and the disappearance of the tram operator. So the only thing I can think of is that once Krycek let Mulder get to the top, either if the tram operator wasn't dead yet, then he just straight up killed him and buried his body or disappeared his body somewhere, and then just drove up the mountain and tried to pull man, I left before you got to the top. I don't know what happened to the tram operator routine. Because I think, didn't they say it was like an hour drive up the mountain?
Something like that, yeah. And so that's why they were doing it that way. It was faster to do it with the cable car than with a car, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess he was trying to at least temporarily play that off, if only to give himself enough opportunity to take out Dwayne Barry. Because in the long run, there's no way that ruse would have, kept on going. Mulder would have figured it out eventually, even if he didn't kill Dwayne Barry. So I think Mulder was too caught up in Scully being gone and the fact that he finally had Dwayne Barry in custody again, I guess, to think about the fact, that there was a problem with the tram on the way up and that the tram operator was now missing, which just gave Krycek enough of a window to kill Dwayne Barry and then skip town.
Well, which is what eventually happens. And it sort of begs the question that before this happens, there's that conversation between Krycek and the smoking man, where the smoking man is basically telling him, look, you've earned his trust, so just keep playing it cool. Keep things the way they're going right now. Don't do anything. And that's where he gives him that whole speech about better to, we don't want to risk turning him into a martyr or whatever it is that he actually says, right? But then the very next day is when Mulder's like, hey, let me borrow your car. And he immediately knows. And then after that, Krycek disappears. So what I'm wondering is somehow they realize that Mulder knows. That's why Krycek bolts, right? So when do they find that out? Like, at what point does it become evident to them that Mulder knows what's up and that's it? His cover's blown, so he's going to have to move on.
My guess would be the insistence on the toxicology reports.
Mm.
That would probably be that's the only thing I could think of that would be the main tip-off, because he does that and then he files the complaint reports to Skinner, at which point Skinner tries to get his secretary to get Krycek to come in to address them, and then they find out that he didn't show up for work and his numbers have been disconnected.
Yeah, that's a good detail. Again, we have here. I think that Skinner is I really like this character because he's sort of he's the angry chief, but he's also like an ally. The way that Pileggi plays him is this. I just love that. It's this line between being the obnoxious, angry chief, but also being a very sympathetic character. And that's a very interesting balance, which I think is rare in this kind of show, where he's not really antagonistic. He's bullheaded and he's the angry chief, but he's never entirely antagonistic. Like even at the hospital, when he's like, you disobeyed a direct order, but he's not penalizing him in any way. So it's sort of like, you disobeyed a direct order. What am I going to do with you? So it's the sort of thing where you get the sense that he definitely he knows that the X-Files need to remain open. He knows that Mulder should still be working those cases. And so at the end of this episode, he's like, all right, I'm reopening them. And he says something like to the effect of, that's the only way that's a way that we can hurt them. Is that something like, he says something like that, right? Like, that's how we get them or something like that? Like
something to that effect. I think he realizes that he's been used and he's not very happy about it. And that's pretty much the only way he can lash out, is to reopen the X-Files just to piss them off.
Yeah, I get the sense. I get that sense too. There's a lot of great work by Duchovny in these two episodes. Mm-hmm. Several times throughout the first season, I pointed out how he at times seemed a bit wooden, like he was having trouble getting to those kind of big moments. Maybe it was a lack of comfort. Maybe, he's still trying to find the character and trying to figure out how to do those things. But here, I think he just knocks it out of the park. I think he does a great job in both episodes. He's got in the Dwayne Barry episode, you have that whole thing where it's Dog Day Afternoon, it's Mad City, it's that relationship between him and and Dwayne Barry, where he's sort of being the negotiator, but and you get a lot of really good acting, from both, because he has to play off Railsback's grandstanding, his, like, as you said, the intensity dialed up to 11, and Duchovny doesn't try to match him. He does more quiet work, more sort of reserved work, very dramatic work that I think is very effective. Those scenes work very well. Those are very good dramatic scenes. The one bit where he's getting the information from Scully through the earpiece, and she's basically telling him this guy's a psychotic. That part's interesting. The way he comes to sort of understand that, okay, this guy's bad news, is when he says, okay, I need you to tell me, did you make any of this up? And then when he loses his shit, he's like, all right, this guy's crazy. Right? And so he's like, you forgot to lock the door. And that's an interesting thing, because you know that throughout this entire episode, Mulder does not want to harm Dwayne Barry. Mm-hmm. He's trying to reach out to him. He believes in him, and he's trying to do things in such a way that he wants to do it the humane way. He knows the feds just want to take him down. Yep. He knows that that's what's going to happen, and he doesn't actually want that to happen. He's trying to help him and maybe get information from him as well. So it is interesting how at the end of that ordeal, when he realizes that maybe he was wrong, because that he does get kind of disillusioned, because he says, I believed him. At that point he's thinking that he was wrong to believe him, and when he realizes that he was wrong to believe him, he's like, all right, fine, I'm just going to let the feds kill you. But you go from that, the humane Mulder, to you basically see him completely lose his cool at the end of Ascension, when he finally confronts Dwayne Barry in the hospital room and comes very close, in his rage, comes very close to killing him. Yeah. Because there's that moment there where he starts choking him, where you can see it in his face. He's prepared. He's so angry at him that he comes very close to actually snapping his neck or something. And we have not seen Mulder like this in any episode that I can recall.
Usually when someone is antagonizing Mulder, he just jokes it off, either to just brush it off or to actively piss them off even further, like with Donald Logue.
That's right, yeah.
Or sometimes he can get frustrated and snippy, but never physically aggressive, not like he is there.
Right. Where by that point, you really see him lose his cool. And they do subtle things, I guess. I mean, they're not entirely subtle, but it is sort of this thing where, with the makeup, like he's unshaven. Yeah. You get this thing. He hasn't been sleeping. He probably hasn't showered. He's basically just in a bad way. And it is interesting. We have not seen Mulder like that. We have not seen Mulder burned out. And so I thought it was intriguing to explore that side of him. I expect it won't be the last time. I expect that, I mean, this thing went on for 9 seasons, so 11 if you count the revival. But the thing is that it's an intriguing wrinkle to add to the character who's somebody who's usually so cool about things, to actually see him lose that. And part of that is because he loses Scully. Yeah. And I think that that's very much the point. I think that we are to understand just how important Scully is to him, because it is when he loses her, and at this point he thinks that she may even be dead. Yeah. By the end of Ascension, when she's been abducted, it's almost like there's a meta aspect to it, because I was saying, like, at the start of this conversation, I brought up how the showrunners had an opportunity deal with Gillian Anderson's pregnancy by eliminating her character from the show. Given that they were angry, they very easily could have just said, okay, fuck this, let's just kill her off and we'll figure out what to do. And yet they didn't. And it's because they recognized that she was very important to the show. And so I think they allow that to play out a little bit too. It's almost like they bake it into the storytelling where they're saying Gillian Anderson is important to the show and Scully is very important to Mulder.
Yeah.
And therefore these two people are very important. This is important. This has to be resolved in some way.
That's also laid out pretty well in the couple scenes that Mulder has with her mother at the start of Ascension as well, and at the end of Ascension as well.
Yeah. When she gives him back the necklace,
Mm-hmm.
the crucifix necklace, which was given to Scully when she turned 15. This is another reference, because he brings that up. We talked about how in the past we did discuss how Scully is a skeptic, but she has a religious upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an aspect of her that has faith, but it has to do with her spirituality, not with her scientific beliefs. Right. And so that kind of comes up in conversation here because he does bring up how it's kind of strange that a skeptic would wear this. Yeah. He points that out to the mother, and so it shows you that Scully does have a relationship with her spirituality. And this also, it was given to her by her mother, so there's also the sentimental connection to the necklace,
Mm-hmm.
of course.
Yeah.
It goes beyond the spiritual significance of it. But it is an interesting element, and I do like how they bring it up. And I think it's nicely handled. That's a nice scene between Mulder and the mother.
Yeah, and it's a good way to expand the mother's character even further than, when we had seen her earlier in the series. Just from the simple fact that she kind of refuses to accept the necklace back and just says, you give it back to her when you find her. What she's really saying is, I don't want to take this necklace from you because it would be me accepting that she might not be coming back. And she's not ready for that yet.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where you those are the kinds of good character beats that are in good writing and good storytelling, where it's her saying, I'm not going to accept that my daughter's gone.
Yeah.
I know, she's missing right now, but I know we're going to find her. I know she's still alive. So you just give this to her when you see her. It's fine. And so that is a good dramatic beat. And Mulder, who at that point, I think Mulder is slightly pessimistic
Mm-hmm.
about the ultimate fate because he's aware of how these things usually go. Plus he has the trauma of having lost his sister. So he's thinking whether it's the aliens or whether the shady government people like the Smoking Man have something to do with Scully's disappearance. Whoever it is, these things don't tend to go well. Here I am. It's my sister's been gone for 30 years, so so that's why I think at that point Mulder's prospects are slim. But of course he's very reserved. He kind of nods in agreement and takes the necklace back. So it's good.
And of course that feeds back into his previous experience as a profiler. And, I think part of him thinks that Dwayne Barry just buried her out on the hill somewhere, and that they may never find her body. And then playing off of that also with the mother, when he first runs into her at the start of the episode, she looks him in the face, she looks down at his bloody hand, and then he immediately looks at her and says she's not in there, because he knows exactly what she's thinking.
Right, exactly. It's like, no, don't worry, this is not necessarily,
it's not what it looks like.
Yeah, maybe it's her blood, but the point is her body is not there, so don't worry, that's not what you think. Yeah, that is great. All around this is good. This is good storytelling. It does show the X-Files deepening the mythology, expanding it, becoming more of a serialized kind of show, telling more expansive stories, widening the scope. And it seems interesting that it feels like maybe they were forced to do it based on circumstance, but it worked out in their favor.
Oh yeah.
Because it allows them to throw an interesting wrinkle into the series. Because to have the second lead kind of disappear halfway through the second season, it's a it's just something that you don't really see very often in a story of this nature, that they take those kinds of risks.
The funny thing is, we've had so much to talk about in terms of, the actors, the performances, the character work, that we actually haven't addressed any of, well, other than the cigarette smoking man and Krycek, we haven't addressed any of the abduction or alien conspiracy stuff that's within both episodes. Both the sequences of Dwayne Barry being abducted, everything to do with the metal pieces that are in his body, Scully scanning that one at the grocery store, and the machines going haywire, them apparently tracking her to her home, or Dwayne Barry tracking her to her home based on the implant. Yeah. Like, there's a lot of crazy stuff in there.
Yeah, they throw some stuff out there that is very kind of, and they don't resolve it. See, like that's the thing. That is the classic, the X-Files constant is, we're going to have a lot of these unresolved mysteries. We're going to have little tidbits we'll throw out at you that maybe will pay off eventually, or maybe we won't. And so, the metal pieces, the tracking device, the serial number that shows up when she, she's at the supermarket, scans that thing, and essentially ruins the supermarket.
Yeah. What'd you do?
Nothing. And then she's a terrible liar. And you go, all that stuff is going to have some significance, or maybe not. And for a show that was very reserved about showing aliens for the entirety of its first season, they're certainly not shy anymore. Now it's all about, here they are again. Here you go. And I think those were children in suits.
Probably.
Just to have kind of an otherworldly quality to them. Those scenes were interesting. They reminded me of the movie Fire in the Sky.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, kind of a low rent version of what was in Fire in the Sky. And I don't remember the year. I think Fire in the Sky is like from 93, 94 or something. It's from around that time.
Somewhere around there. But, and especially the experiments on the spaceship stuff feels very Fire in the Sky. And it's interesting, of course, Mulder initially thinks that Dwayne Barry is an abductee. Scully thinks he's just absolutely insane and off his rocker. And the kicker is that they're both right.
Yes.
He is insane, but he's also telling the truth.
Right, yes. He's insane because he's telling the truth. One could argue. There was something about the timeline that was a little confusing to me, actually, because when they talk about Dwayne Barry, like he's a former FBI agent who left they say very clearly 1982, right? The implication being that he had some kind of an episode and ended up either being discharged or leaving
and out
or whatever.
Of institutions, I think is
right.
What I said.
As of 82. So one can assume that his abduction happened around this time. Now, the thing is that the opening of the episode is 85. Mm-hmm. I remember that very clearly. It was 1985, and we see him in his home, once again, either being abducted or observed, or something is happening, and he's like, oh my God, it's happening again, he says, right? That's basically to the extent of what he says, right? So, and then this episode takes place 9 years after that. So you go, I'm not sure, because at that point he's in his home, but he's in and out of institutions. So what does the event that we see in 85, so that's a subsequent abduction or a subsequent experience that he's had. Mm-hmm. And before what we see in the cold open, he's already experienced something.
At least once, yeah. Yeah, the implication is that they just keep coming back and back and back and picking him up at various points in his life. And he's at the point now where when he's about to escape the institution, he said, they're coming again soon. I can feel it. They're not going to take me this time. And then he busts out. And then, of course, his half-crazed idea is to trade Scully for himself.
Yes.
Of course, then the question is that his own idea? Was it implanted into him somehow? Because obviously this has been coordinated. And then you also get bits like him saying that the government is in on it. They're either helping or at least have a deal with the aliens to allow this to continue, which they play off in a goofy way in one of his visions slash flashbacks with these really dorky and out of place looking suited up guys standing in the corner watching. Then obviously, if you sit and think about it, he's also not lying there, because obviously the cigarette smoking man has some sort of connection to coordinate all of this. And then you also have Mulder. One of Mulder's first questions to him, not to suss out whether he's lying or delusional or anything, but literally you can tell Mulder's just trying to categorize what kind of event this is, because one of his immediate questions is, all right, were they really tall or were they the really short ones? Yeah, and of course we know it's the short ones, but apparently, there's clearly a difference in terms of the experiences one might have as far as Mulder is concerned. So
right. Yeah, because as we saw in his flashback, apparently the one that took his sister was one of the very tall ones.
Yeah.
So now he's trying to see, okay, so there's different races or different, types, different, maybe for different purposes. But yeah, and those scenes are, again, very well handled. It's not too hokey, it's not too bad. Yeah, you've got, little people or kids in suits, but it's pretty well done. It's still kept very low key. It still has that minimalist approach that I like about the show, where it's more elaborate because they have a bigger budget, so they can start to do more things. Even the scenes with Scully, we have that one scene with Scully on what we can assume is the ship or something, like there's something happening where some experiment is being done to her. I mean, her belly is inflated, and I mean, this.
They really leaned into that.
Yeah, it's very unsettling, and it implies many things. And God, I'm sure we'll eventually get answers to this, but it is it's very intriguing, and that's also well handled with just some suggested stuff, nothing too in your face. And yeah, it reminded me of Fire in the Sky, which of course was a lot more elaborate. I mean, the big thing about that movie that I always thought was pretty interesting is that I had no idea about, like, I knew the movie existed. I knew it had something to do with a guy it was based on a true story, quote unquote, and it had to do with a guy who was abducted by aliens, or who said he was abducted by aliens. But for anyone who hasn't seen Fire in the Sky, I'll just say this, like, it's a very intriguing kind of absorbing drama about this guy and his family, and it's his relationship with his brother, and his, he's just kind of living his life and whatever. And you're just basically watching this dramatic piece about small town life. And then in the final 15 minutes, it becomes this horrifying film, because the entire sequence, the abduction sequence, which makes up the climax of Fire in the Sky, I still remember the shock I felt when I first saw that. Because I didn't, I sat there, I didn't know what was coming. I didn't know what this movie was like, and so I'm just watching this movie that's, it's fine, it's interesting. I'm having a decent enough time of it, appreciating the performances, and then all of a sudden, boom, the big sequence on the ship with D.B. Sweeney screaming, and so I was just like, wow, okay.
By the way, Fire in the Sky came out in 1993 in March. And the director of it, Rob Lieberman, ended up directing 2 episodes of The X-Files later on in his career. So they're clearly fans.
Yes. Oh, clearly. And so that came out in March, and I think that this came out much later. Okay, so they are, later. Yeah, there is a thing where it's like, yeah, we liked that movie. That's our speed. Okay, so there you go. That solves it. This was definitely inspired by Fire in the Sky. It was very reminiscent. Very reminiscent. And yeah, I mean, as well handled. One thing I noticed, which was kind of interesting, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure, like, there's this scene where, in the sequence when Dwayne Barry is driving up to the mountain, you hear the song "Red Right Hand." Yeah, was it Nick Cave?
Mm-hmm.
I think. Yeah. And that's a very rare. I think it's the first overt use of a contemporary music cue that I've noticed in the show. Like, they almost never have music cues. I mean, they do in certain moments, like whatever, Beyond the Sea, or something maybe evocative, or something that has to do with the plot or something. But this is them using a song that would have been from around that time.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was intriguing, and I wonder if that will start to happen more. I don't know.
It will, but it's funny you mentioned that. I'd completely forgotten about it, but you're right. This season looks a little more slicker in general. But two of the biggest examples of how the budget has been raised have been the more creature suits now. You know, you have the Fluke Man. We've got a bunch of aliens and alien experimental technology in this one. You know, that's one. But the other big, you know, signifier that the budget's been raised is they're finally pulling popular music into the series. So when that popped up on the radio, I thought the same as well. And I don't know if it was, I'm not exactly sure the year. It might have been 94, it might have been 95, but around the season 2, season 3 time, they put out an album that was music from and inspired by the X-Files, and it was just a straight up soundtrack album with a bunch of different, you know, like rock songs and stuff like that on it.
Oh, okay. So, and I'm sure this was on that.
Probably.
Like, right, Red Right Hand is from 94.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's from Let Love In, the 94 Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds. So yeah, I mean, I think on the one hand, yes, it's a sign of we have more money, so now we can. So that means that the reason that there were no popular music cues in the first season, it wasn't because they were trying to not date the series or sort of maintain a classical minimalist approach. It was simply because we can't afford to get, you know, any current pop songs into this thing, so we're not going to do that. And I mean, I don't really mind it, but I do think that all that stuff that we were talking about, how it doesn't feel that dated because there's a sort of classical quality to it, where the only thing that's a little bit dated is technology. But in terms of the filmmaking, in terms of the storytelling, it just sort of has this deliberate pace to it. It works as a period piece. I mean, I guess all of that is still evident, even if they drop in a very 90s music cue. It's not as bad. It's still not as bad because like the song kind of fits the scene, and it's not like they dropped like a huge top 10 Billboard hit. You know, they sort of punched in an interesting song, whereas if they had just gone for whatever the latest top 10 Billboard hit would have been, like if they like dropped in like a Mariah Carey song or whatever, like I think that would have been a lot more. And that's what they do in shows of the 2000s. Like of the early aughts shows like CSI or whatever, they'll put in some hot track like that's like a radio hit of the period.
Yeah.
And that will immediately say, oh yeah, I remember when this thing was like all over the place. Yeah.
Well, I was seeing exactly when that album came out. The album is called Songs in the Key of X, music from and inspired by the X-Files. They put it out in 96, but I know it also pulls tracks from at least season 2 and 3. Yeah, Red Right Hand is on the album, and there's one song that's going to, I think, pop up in the next episode that's on it. But just talking about it, they never really go Grey's Anatomy with this stuff. It's generally only in songs will generally only pop up in instances, you know, where they'd be applicable, whether it's someone driving in a car or if there's a sequence in a bar or a club. That's the kind of instances they're going to stick those songs in there. They're never really going to get crazy with it like, you know, most shows, especially from the 2000s onward, have.
Yeah, or even some late 90s. I mean, it's like I don't mind it so much. You know, Felicity is unthinkable without Sarah McLachlan and everything else on that soundtrack. And so for me, that's more like, oh, okay, it evokes a time and place. It's okay for that show to feel dated because it's very much chronicling a very specific period of the late 90s, and it exists as a time capsule. But I always feel like genre shows have to be very careful to not date themselves quite that much. And so I'm glad that in the case of the X-Files, they're careful about not making it this thing where, you know, you hear Paula Cole singing "I Don't Want to Wait" and it's immediately, you know, Dawson's Creek or whatever it is. Like, you know, so in the case of this, they're still keeping it very much a genre show and trying to maintain it about the storytelling and, you know, not have it be too dated, I guess. I don't know, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, my two immediate thoughts when I heard Red Right Hand, other than the fact that I like the song, is one, oh, we have a music budget now, and two, hey, they beat Scream to it by about 2 years. So
Yeah, yeah, you're right. It's utilized very famously in Scream. I remember that.
Agent Krycek was the last person with Dwayne Barry before he died. I believe that Agent Krycek gave away the whereabouts of Dwayne Barry and Agent Scully to whoever he's working with.
And who was that?
I don't know. The military? Some covert organization within the government? Whoever it is that the man who smokes those cigarettes works for.
Why?
Because Agent Scully got too close to whatever it is they're trying to deny, because she had hard and damning evidence, that metallic implant in her possession, or because her termination would prevent further involvement with me and my work. Who are these people who can just murder with impunity and we can't do anything about it?
Let it go, Agent Mulder.
Like hell.
There's nothing you can do.
What can you do about it?
There's only one thing that I can do, Agent Mulder. As of right now, I'm reopening the X-Files. That's what they fear the most.
And that is that. I hope you enjoyed our discussion, and if you did enjoy it, there are many ways you can support the podcast, which is available on Anchor FM, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. You can subscribe. You can rate and or review it depending on what platform you're enjoying it on, and of course you can share and spread the word on social media. Please do any or all of these things. Every little bit helps. Look for the Erix Antoine Network on Facebook or on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at ErixAntoineNet and check out my film reviews on Letterboxd. You should also check out Daniel Baldwin's website, theschlocketeer.com, and follow him on Twitter at Daniel W. Baldwin. I'm Erix Antoine, and I'll be back in a few days when Daniel and I will be discussing 3. Not The Three, which some of you may remember as Donald Kaufman's celebrated thriller screenplay and adaptation, but rather an X-Files episode called simply 3. I hope you'll join us. And until then, please remember that we must deny everything. See you next time.